to the Peer Support Podcast. Today's podcast is all about reading and recovery and is presented to you by Rachel, that's me, hello, Andrea.
That's me, hi everyone.
And Holly.
That's me, hello everyone.
And we're all peer support workers who work within the Wellbeing Service. Today's podcast will cover what are peer support workers and sharing peer support workers' lived experiences of reading and their own recovery. We hope that you come away from today's podcast with an understanding of how reading can support recovery. So if you're listening to this afternoon or this morning actually and have not heard of peer support workers, I'll just give you a little introduction as to what we do. So peer support workers all have their own experience of living with mental health challenges, and we share our experience of this with others along with our recovery stories to offer hope. We use our experience of recovery to help people make sense of what they are going through and to explore what may support them in their recovery. So like I said, today's podcast is all about reading and recovery. So we asked our peer support workers within the service, what was their own experience of using reading in their recovery and as their recovery continues. So I'm going to hand over to Holly and Andrea, who are going to give us some ideas.
Yeah, so one of the first examples we've got is reading someone else's recovery story. So of course we've already spoken about how powerful it can be to read other people's stories and how their recovery story has been for them. We've also got an example of losing themselves in a fiction book. So that sense of being able to kind of be in a world for a little while and kind of lose yourself and just take yourself out of the present moment, I guess, for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Holly.
Examples there.
We've got starting small with reading, so not necessarily reading a huge book, reading something more condensed like a magazine or something on social media.
And we've also got using audiobooks rather than a paper book, so listening to a book instead. And also we've got book clubs and motivate and as a motivator to read. So people have found it really, really helpful to go along to book clubs and found that as a big motivator for them to start reading again.
And we've also had a peer support worker who told us about gratitude cards. So these are small cards that have reasons to be grateful written on them.
That's an interesting one, Andrea, not sort of one that I was overly familiar with. So thank you for that. So some really sort of varied experiences there from the peer support workers within the team. I don't know about you guys, but I know there's several of those that kind of, when you're reading them out, I'm going, oh yeah, no, that kind of fits with me and how sort of reading is and was for my recovery and is in my recovery. And, definitely for me, reading someone else's recovery story, like you said, Holly, that's a powerful thing, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and yeah. I was probably the queen of self-help books right at the beginning of my recovery. I must admit that now. But one of the, really sort of ones that stuck with me are the ones that are someone else's recovery story. So whether that was mental health, and I did read an awful lot of mental health recovery stories, but any kind of person who's been through anything really difficult and the things that they've done or experienced and sort of coming out the other side. So yeah, definitely when you said that one, Holly, I'm kind of nodding and going, yeah, I kind of think that one. What about you guys? Were there any that sort of stuck with you in terms of those experiences that the peer support workers have shared, or any more that you can add there?
So sorry, Andrea, you go.
No, Holly, you go.
So yeah, for me it was definitely audiobooks helped me a lot, actually, because reading has always been a bit of a barrier for me. So reading in the kind of traditional way of reading a book has always been quite a challenge. So when I kind of discovered audiobooks for myself a bit later on in my recovery process, it was a big kind of opened up a new world for me in a way. So I was able to kind of listen to stories and books that I perhaps wouldn't have normally read, and also it helped with that kind of concentration that you lose so often in the early stages when you're struggling, and I certainly did, and I found it so much easier to listen rather than to sit and read, so that really helps me. But also I think what I loved about audiobooks was the fact that it didn't kind of stop me from doing other things at the same time. So I could listen to audiobook but also tackle my washing up at the same time, which is always a bit of a challenge for me.
Oh, you and me both, Holly.
Absolutely. So, in that sense, it was a good motivator as well to get other things done.
Yeah, like you say, if you're kind of listening to something else whilst doing something that perhaps you don't really want to be doing, I kind of put my 80s music on when I'm washing up, because like you say, it's the motivator to go, well, I'll listen to this whilst I'm doing that. So thanks for that, Holly. And Andrea, thank you for holding fire. What were your kind of thoughts on that?
Okay, so music I've always been quite good with, but back in the early days, my concentration for reading was very poor. So I could never, really even getting through a couple of pages of a chapter I struggled with, and almost needed to go back and write notes down for who the different characters were and stuff like that. And also audiobooks, couldn't concentrate on those either. But what I was able to do was do my reading in really small amounts. So maybe taking magazine articles or things that people had posted on social media, and then start that route and start small and then build up bigger. More recently, I've actually joined a book club. It's something that I'm doing with some of my colleagues at work. So we can't get together, at lunchtimes or anything like that. So we had a meeting after work one day. We agreed on the title, and we've met several times and given ourselves a couple of chapters in between to read. And that's been really nice, because not only have we had that space where we meet to discuss it, but we've been like sending each other messages and, encouraging each other to read. It's been really, really nice. So we're coming to the end of our first one, now going on to another one. Yeah.
Excellent. And how has that felt doing that virtually? Because when anyone says like book club, I kind of think, right, people are in a coffee shop or they're in a library, we're all sat round. For some reason, I think people sit on the floor. Don't know why, but it's just the vision that I have in my head of it. How does that work in this, virtual kind of sharing of things? Has that been a sort of a strange experience, or one that's actually is working quite okay? Because it sounds like you're getting a lot from it already.
Yeah, it's been different, and I think it's more about having something in common, rather than sitting around and actually pulling the book out. And we've been good at like remembering what's gone on and stuff, and we've only taken it a few chapters at a time, which is nice. But doing it virtually, we've been meeting after work, and doing that regularly. So it's been a time when everyone can still get together despite what's going on. Yeah, it's been good, and I think everybody's enjoyed it who's taken part, and we're going to do it again, like I say, so it must be working.
Yeah, and like when you're talking about it, Andrea, because obviously I can see you whilst we do this podcast, and I can see that you kind of, it's lifting you, and it's like you say, it's a good kind of motivator to get involved, and also helps us to connect, doesn't it, and keep learning and keep doing the 5 ways to well-being as well. So seems like lots of different piss poor experiences there in terms of reading and recovery. And I was then sort of thinking, so that's kind of looking back, isn't it, in terms of our recovery and how things kind of go now. But I was then thinking, well hang on, when I was struggling, was there any light bulb moments that I had, when you kind of, you're kind of struggling along or muddling along, and suddenly there's that moment that makes you go, Ah, okay. Yeah, interesting. And, for me, it was when I wasn't able to read, because reading is a massive, massive passion of mine. And I remember sitting on my sofa thinking, well, I'm not working. I've got plenty of time. I may as well, get through some of these books. And I'd pick up a favourite and I just literally could not read it. Like you said, Andrea, I'd read it through, yeah, no idea. Read the page, no idea. And just got to the point that I threw it across the room and had a jolly good cry. That for me was a big light bulb moment in terms of actually understanding how unwell I was at that point and how I felt. But also similarly in terms of when I started to realise that I could read again and that I was able to concentrate and it was okay and it wasn't going to be permanent. So so for me that was a moment there. But also in the reading that I did, one of the books, I can't remember which one it was unfortunately, but it had the quote, "This too shall pass." And I remember that really stuck with me. And there was a time where I was lying in my bed, really feeling very, very unwell, literally clinging on to the mattress for dear life. That's how I felt. And I just remember saying to myself, "This too shall pass, this too shall pass, this too shall pass." 4 really, really simple words that I've read that, goodness me, got me through a very, very difficult time kind of reading that and sort of remembering that. But also another one of our peer support workers highlighted to us, there's a quote linked to St. Julian of Norwich, who was alive hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Can't tell you when, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it was, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." And that's really fascinating for me because it links so much to "This too shall pass" and the quote for me, but also for me is how old it is. That was hundreds of years ago and actually it's still relevant now. Holly, was there any kind of light bulb moments there for you?
Yeah, so I've got a book here actually that my auntie bought me years ago, full of inspirational quotes, and one of them in particular, for whatever reason, just kind of struck me. So it says, "Warm, eager, living life, to learn, to desire, to know, to feel, to think, to act. That is what I want, and nothing else." Now, I think one of the reasons why that kind of struck me is because, when you're really struggling, you're very, very low, feeling very low, you don't really feel like you're living, you feel like you're existing. And I think part of me reading quotes like that helped to kind of really reignite my interest in life in general. And I think that is what that quote says, that life is about living and experiencing, even if sometimes those experiences are painful. That's okay because you're living life. And I think so often when we're feeling very low, we don't experience any of those things. Sometimes we can feel quite numb. And I think that quote kind of reminded me of what living felt like, and helps me to get that kind of desire back again, I guess, to start living again.
And it's just really interesting, isn't it, Holly, that we have different quotes that mean different things for us. So like for you, it's like reigniting that interest in life, and for me it was very much something to get me through that moment. I'm just getting through this moment, and this moment is going to go. It feels really unpleasant at this moment in time, but it's going to disappear. And it's just really interesting how the things that we read, like Andrew said, whether they're magazines, you can get some fascinating quotes on Google if you take a look. It's very sort of varied, sort of different things, some of them not so useful, I would have to say, but how those things kind of stick with us. And Andrea, is there anything for you that was like a light bulb moment, perhaps something that you've read or an experience that you've had?
Yeah, there is, Rachel, actually. Mine came at a point in my recovery when I was really stuck in the past. So I'd spend so much time running over things in my head that had gone wrong, things that I had no control over. And one day I was visiting a church and I came across the serenity prayer, which is grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And at this point, I was desperate to move on and, look to the future. And actually reading this made me realize, okay, I can't change those things in the past, but if I'm strong, I can change what happens in the future, and I can make my own path now, and the future can be what I'd like it to be. And actually that knowing the difference was a big thing for me. So what can I leave, and what's now going to be my future? Yeah, so that was a massive one for me that just came from visiting a church. I did buy the bookmark and I've still got it today. So yeah, important to me.
Again, it's interesting, isn't it, how different these things can be and how vital they can be at that point in our recovery. So again, for me, coping with that really difficult moment, this too shall pass, and other peer support worker with the St. Julian of Norwich quote, how that helps, and Holly's poetry is just really, really interesting that actually there's so much out there in terms of what is supportive and what we hold on to and what gets us through those moments in our recovery that are difficult, but also keeps us going in our recovery now. Like you said, you've got the bookmark and it's still something that you remind yourself of. So actually it's not just something transient, it's something that helps us carry on, and keep going through these times. So yeah, thank you. So another thing I was kind of thinking of was also overcoming challenges. How do we do that? So like I said, when I was unable to read my favorite book and I threw it across the room because I just couldn't do it, for me it was a really difficult moment, but I also knew that it wasn't going to be permanent. I had this kind of sense that it's not going to be permanent. And, like I said, Andrea, going back to reading small things, taking the pressure off. Actually, I'm not going to read a whole book or a few pages of a book. I might just have a look at the news channel and sort of read the different sort of things coming up there, or just take the time to be self-compassionate and not put the focus on me. So that was a big one for me. And, I know other peer support workers have said to us, how books are escapism. So actually for those really difficult moments when we do want to be somewhere else, taking ourselves off into a book can be a really nice way to have that time to sort of reset, but also acknowledging at the same time that actually concentration can still be difficult. Because I don't know about you and Holly, but there'll be times where I still read things several times over. It goes in one ear and out the other, and I still have to acknowledge that there are days when my concentration really isn't there. But yeah, kind of overcoming it in terms of knowing when that's happening and being kind to ourselves when that is. Andrew, is there anything sort of for you that kind of helped when things were sort of difficult and you weren't able to read as you wanted to?
Yeah. So that I've already mentioned that I started off reading the magazine articles and things online. Well, I got quite good and all right with that. So I decided that I would progress onto books. But I knew that, like you've just said, Rachel, if I set myself up with a massive book, I'm going to fall down. So I progressed on to quotes in a book that had positive quotes in it. So I know that they were still very short, but that's something that I could go back to time and time again. I had quite a low mood around about then, so that also helped build my confidence and belief in myself. Now I knew that I couldn't carry a book around everywhere with me. Yeah, so what I used to do was I used to copy these quotes out. Maybe I'd stick one on my diary, other places around the house, on kitchen cupboards, maybe somewhere I could see from when I was laying in bed. I used to have a lot of baths back then. They were my safe space. So I'd stick a quote, on the wall at the bottom of the bath. Yeah, so they were really, really helpful to me, and I still do it now. When I took them down and didn't need to rely on them so much, I stuck them on the inside of my cupboards. So sometimes now when I'm reaching for a cup and I'm making a cup of tea, I kind of look and that still puts a smile on my face. So I don't use them, but they're still there to go back to every so often if I just need that little boost.
That's really interesting you said that, Andrea, because I have what I call a bashful vision board. So it's bashful because I don't have it on display, but it is in a cupboard. So I open the cupboard, and on my vision board, I have like various different quotes. You know, there's one from Dolly Parton I've got in there, one from Rick Mayall, you know, various different people that I probably found them on the internet, or I found them in magazines, things that hit me, that kind of make me go, yeah. And I put it on the vision board, and like I say, each time you open the cupboard door, it's kind of there. And you know, I'll take the time, you know, I might read a little bit of one and remind myself of why I put it up there in the first place. And like you say, having those things that help us smile, but help us to link back to our recovery and our ongoing recovery can be really helpful, can't they? And definitely keep sort of adding to it, and sort of different things there. And Holly, you know, in terms of sort of challenges, I know you've kind of mentioned sort of audio books as well, haven't you? So was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, Rachel, I just want to say what a great idea of vision board is, and actually that's just reminded me that that's something that I want to get onto. So thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome.
Of that. But yeah, in terms of ongoing using reading ongoing for my recovery, something that's I discovered very early on back at school actually was poetry. It came about because my tutors decided that I needed to practice my writing skills while we were on the summer break, and I came up with the idea of writing a poem every day, which I did, and in turn that then inspired me to read poetry, because of course to be able to write you need to read as well. So that really kind of ignited a strong interest in poetry, and what I would do is I would find some poems that really resonated with me, with my experiences, and I'd read them over and over again. And I think it was a way of me processing what I was feeling and what I was going through. And also then what I would do is I'd write my own poetry, and again keep reading it back. Probably sounds quite big-headed of me to do that, but I think it was an important thing for me to do at that time. I was processing what I was feeling and going through, and it was such a therapeutic process to go through. And to this day, poetry plays a huge part in my ongoing recovery process. Still read poetry, still write poetry occasionally, and it's such a therapeutic process to go through, to look back on what you've written in the past and look at where you are now, and it's such a interesting and powerful thing to do, and quite funny sometimes as well.
I don't know, as you were saying that, Holly, I'm kind of thinking of all the diaries that I've kept over the years, you know, ones from school, ones from more recent times. And like you say, when you pick up something like that you wrote a while ago, and you kind of look, you know, there's the element of, oh goodness me, did I really think that? But actually also, particularly ones when I was unwell, looking back at how far I've come. You know, I'm literally reading my own recovery story and kind of going, oh yeah, I remember that day. Oh gosh, that was bad. Yeah, that was really difficult. But then looking through and going, oh look how I dealt with it, how like you say, how I processed it, and how powerful that is actually to read the stuff that, you know, we've previously written. I mean, Andrea, is there anything that you wanted to add there?
Yeah, there is, Rachel. So when Holly was talking about poetry, it made me think about the power of reading a letter, whether it's typed or written. And actually, over the years, reading letters has been really important to me, because when I was in hospital giving birth to my son, I met another mum. And because we gave birth on the same day, we've always stayed in touch. Now, that was 25 years ago. Now, we write 2 letters a year to each other, one on the boys' birthdays and one at Christmas. And actually, when things have not been so great for me, receiving those 2 letters has meant ever such a lot. The pleasure I've got from reading the letter, finding out what's going on in the other lady's life. And obviously, like Holly said, reading and writing go together. So I've had to write a letter to her, so she had one to receive as well. And like you said, using it to look back on what we've been through, I read back over the letters now, and when we correspond with each other, we talk about how things have been in the past and how far we've both come. And so, yeah, letters is another wonderful way of reading for me. Has meant so much over the years.
And there's also the personal connection there, isn't there? You know,
oh yeah,
someone's taken the time to write to us, and we've written back. And like you say, when you look over it, you know, a few years later or a few months later, and you're like, oh goodness me, is that what we were thinking? Look how far I've come. Look how I continue to move forward in things. And it's a really powerful thing to do there. Okay, so in terms of the podcast today, so we're coming towards the end of it, and we thank you for listening this far in, much appreciated. So we've shared the peer support worker lived experience, examples of reading and their own recovery. Our next podcast will be looking at stress.
And you can find book recommendations from the peer support workers on today's podcast notes.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking that you'd like to refer yourself to the Wellbeing Service, then it's a really simple process. You can self-refer to the Wellbeing Service, and you can do so on our website or over the telephone. Again, if you're listening to this podcast and you're currently having treatment within the Wellbeing Service and would like to have peer support, then please do speak to your therapist who can make the referral for you. So I'd like to say thank you for listening to today's podcast and for joining us. And we hope that you'll be able to join us again for our next podcast, which, like I say, will be focusing on stress. So I'll say goodbye. Goodbye.
I'll say goodbye next. And thanks again for listening along with us today.
And yeah, goodbye for me. And thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thanks. Bye.